So my name is Jonathan Pyle. I'm the Contract Performance Officer at Philadelphia Legal Assistance. And on the panel today, we have, starting with Anne. Yeah, pass the mic around.
Good morning. My name is Anne Sweeney. I'm the Managing Attorney for Community Engagement with the Legal Aid Society of Cleveland.
I'm Angela Tripp. I'm the Director of the Michigan Legal Help Program in Michigan.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rohan Pavluri, CEO and co-founder of Upsolve, which is the largest bankruptcy provider, nonprofit provider in the U.S.
And so the program that really kicked off the concept of sending clients text messages to gather outcomes was Legal Aid Society of Cleveland. So first up, we have Anne Sweeney to talk about that project.
Good morning. Again, we're giving some brief overviews and intros to our programs, and then we're going to have lots of time for discussion. So get your questions ready, but I'm just going to kind of move through this introduction and overview. A few years ago, we initially were grappling with this issue where we recognized that in Cleveland, as is true, I know, with a lot of other legal aid programs, we close 20% of our cases roughly as extended service cases and carefully keep track of outcomes in those cases in a very detailed way, but close about 80% as limited scope service, either A's or B's, and really did not have any clear measures of how effective those limited scope services were at achieving the client's goals, solving their problems, what kinds of outcomes people were getting from things like an advice letter or pro se forms or a meeting with an attorney at a brief advice clinic. And that was our challenge that we set out to begin addressing with our first TIG, the Outcome Texting Project 1. So that was 2015 to 2017 that we had that grant. And we were piloting this idea of collecting that follow-up outcome data from those clients who we provided brief services to, and we tested that in 7 problem areas. The encouraging results from that first TIG led us to then apply for our current TIG, the second outcome texting project, which is essentially just scaling up everything we were doing and expanding on what we did in the first TIG. So just to give you a quick snapshot of the first TIG success, these data are the participants from our basically 2-year period where we first started asking every client who came through our intake process for permission to send text messages. That started in May of 2016, and then continuing through May of 2018, because at that point we actually changed case management systems, and it was a sort of logical point in time to suspend the pilot and move forward. But as you can see, we had a significant percentage of our applicants providing mobile phone numbers and then consenting to receive text messages, about 85%. So among that group then, we had about 1,900 cases for just a little bit less than that number of clients actually receive one or more of the pilot text message outcome surveys. And so overall, anyone who responded to one of those questions in any of those surveys is how we're calculating an overall response rate of just under 60% from that first pilot project. You can see everybody was told right from the start they had the option of opting out, and the opt-out rate was just under 5%. So we were pretty encouraged by these responses and these results to forge ahead. What we took away from that first project were a couple, these are the 4 big picture lessons. Some may sound obvious now, but actually at the time we got a lot of questions and concerns, for example, about would people even agree to texting? Did our client community want to be bothered with, or would they have the capacity for engaging on text? And we think through the first pilot, the answer was clearly yes. We also think the first pilot allowed us to conclude that it is doable, so legal aids can, with a modest investment, engage in texting with their clients. Third, there are brief services that are making a difference. So while we didn't have a huge data set at the end of the pilot to do a robust analysis on the effectiveness question of limited scope services, certainly some of the results are indicating that there is benefit to brief services in some contexts. And finally, we think that part of the success related to designing a text-only survey, that the questions were substantively specific, and we had a really strong partner who gave us good advice on the SMS side. So again, as a result of encouraging results from that TIG, we applied for a second TIG, expanding on that. And these are sort of the 5 big milestones or goals that we're working towards achieving in our current project. We are expanding from just those 7 problem areas to a library of text surveys that will cover all of our brief service cases. We're working to build an API that will automate the exchange of the data between LegalServer and Frontline SMS, which LegalServer is our case management system, and Frontline SMS is the platform we're using for SMS. The third piece is to incorporate messages for our LEP clients, specifically Spanish-speaking clients, for this round. We've also contracted with some social science experts to help us build an analytical framework for how to maximize our learning from the data we collect. And finally, starting a conversation about what a national network should look like and how we can support legal services programs across the country to develop outcome data in this way. Just an overview of the process, really. Client comes in for services, we provide limited scope assistance, the case gets closed in LegalServer. The closing of the case in LegalServer in step 4 actually is the trigger then for the data to get sent to Frontline. Frontline is handling the exchange of the SMS messaging and receiving the responses from the clients. That will be sent back into LegalServer via the API, where we then have the option of analyzing that data in conjunction with all of the other data we have on clients, obviously, in our case management system. And ultimately, then, the results of those analyses should lead us to be able to make more informed decisions about resource allocation and effective service delivery models for our clients. So this is a draft list of the types of new text surveys that we are in the process of developing and implementing. You can see we have them grouped by some of these common problem areas that civil legal aid programs handle. We do also have a catch-all message, a general message for everybody whose problem doesn't happen to meet one of the criteria we have a specific message for. We have also made the decision currently that for the time being at least, we are not sending text messages to any clients who indicate to us up front that their case involves any domestic violence. I think there's a lot to talk about in that question. I'll save that for later, but that's where we landed, at least for the time being. And just to let you know, the focus of our TIG is definitely using texting for outcomes, but it has led us to really use texting in a whole host of varieties for engaging with our client community that I think is super exciting. So these are just some examples of other ways that we are using the same platform to support getting Know Your Rights information to our clients, self-help forms, supporting pro se assistance, and even getting feedback from folks who attend community education presentations. We've done one emerging issue survey where we tried to get feedback from former clients on new problems, and we focused on court debt in that survey. So those are just another few examples. And that is where we are at, and I will let Angela take it from here.
Thank you, Anne. My quick introduction is very different from Anne's in that it is all theoretical, because we are at the start of our TIG project involving texting for outcomes. So I'm going to talk with you about what we hope to do and plan to do, but please know from the beginning that I have more questions than answers. We are doing texting to follow up after triage. Michigan Legal Help is Michigan's self-help website, and in 2018 we launched the Guide to Legal Help, which was another great TIG project, which collects a little bit of information from our users about what they are looking for and some of their the personal characteristics such as income and other factors. There's a section that helps them narrow down and identify their legal problem, and then the result is that they get tailored referrals and information. So at the end of the guide, they get links to forums on Michigan Legal Help, the interactive forums that they can do. They get links to information and articles to educate them about their legal problem. And they also get referrals to legal aid if they're eligible and appropriate, or to the state bar resources or to other organizations. Since we launched the guide, so on Michigan Legal Help, we get about 40,000 visitors a week, and people use our resources to create 324 sets of forms every day. And about 160 people a day finish the Guide to Legal Help, and we're working to increase that number, but we realize everyone who visits the website isn't going to use the guide. So when people, of those 160 people a day who finish the guide, they're pretty evenly split in what they're looking for. About 30% are looking for an attorney specifically, 30% are looking for general information, and 30% are looking specifically for forms. The remaining 10% aren't really sure what they're looking for, but we help them find it. 78% of people who use the guide are at or below the 200% federal poverty level. So we know at least that subset of our website visitors are folks who are eligible for legal aid. And as a result, these are statistics from Q1 to Q3 2019. 28,000 people, almost 29,000 people were referred to legal aid from the guide. 10,000 people who were referred, everyone is referred to state bar resources because obviously, everyone is eligible for those, and 10,000 people clicked on those resources. So that might be lawyer referral service, or just searching through all the lawyers in Michigan and what they specialize in, and also the Modest Means panel. We know that 3,776 people submitted online intake applications for legal aid. We don't know how many other people called legal aid because not everyone has online intake and not everyone wants to do online intake. So, so we have a lot of questions. We don't know what happens to people after they use the guide and leave triage. What impact are we having? What are people doing with the information we give them, and is it useful? And people ask me, just 2 days ago, people were asking me, well, how do you know if what you're doing is useful at all? And I said, I don't know. But we're hoping to find out with our next project. We don't know what impact we're having. It's hard to get feedback because only a few people do the survey, and it's typically at the time that they leave triage. And so it's not, we don't really know what happened later on in the case. And so we get ad hoc feedback from our partners in courts and legal aid, but we wanted a more structured way to learn more about our impact. And I was inspired in part to do this project after participating in another TIG project called the Drake Equation, which was a really interesting way that people were trying to measure impact based on factors that we know, such as the population of Michigan and the percentage of those who have legal problems and the percentage of those who have internet access, and then what percentage of those people come to Michigan Legal Help. And so we can try to guess what part of the need we are meeting. But I wanted more direct information. And then I heard a lot about Cleveland's project, and I was inspired to try to replicate that in a different medium. So I talked a little bit about Michigan Legal Help in the guide, and this is just, I'm sure you can't really see this, but this is a little GIF showing all the resources that people get after they complete the guide. So there are the referrals to the legal aid organizations if they're eligible, the private bar resources, and then the resources on Michigan Legal Help that are relevant to their problem, and then other community resources such as mediation or domestic violence shelter or something else. Questions that we hope to learn are, what of these resources people used and to what end? Did they contact legal aid? Did legal aid take their case? Did they contact the bar for a referral to modest means? And did they get a modest means attorney? If they did self-representation, did they complete their forms? Were they able to complete their case? We also want to use our texting project as an opportunity to give people just-in-time information if they're stuck in their process. If their answers indicate that if their answers to our text indicate that they're not progressing, we want to be able to connect them with the resources that they need at the stage that they're in. So that's our other primary goal. So this is a wheel. I copied Anne's slide. I thought it was very useful about sort of how it will work. And step one is a person will come to Michigan Legal Help with a legal problem. Step two, they will use the guide to legal help to get tailored information and referrals. Step three, hopefully they will opt in for further communication with us via text, and we'll have to work on that messaging to encourage opting in. That opting in will trigger a series of follow-up texts that will be that will vary depending on what their legal problem was and what stage they were in and what referrals they got. And then the visitor will respond, again, hopefully, which will trigger additional following up texts to track their progress with them and give them additional information if they are stuck. Then we'll have this wealth of data, if we are as successful as Cleveland, that we'll use to analyze our system and figure out how to provide additional help. And we will, it will inform our future decision-making at Michigan Legal Help and possibly legal aid. If this project is successful, we will expand it to also work with legal aids and tracking the outcomes from their A and B cases. It was originally part of our TIG, but we're unsure of our future case management system, so we're putting off that part of the project until we know more. But it is our hope to expand to the same style that Cleveland is doing. One other tool that we are going to use to help us do this is that we have Live Help as one of the services we provide on Michigan Legal Help. This is a chat-based interaction like any other, if you've chatted with someone online when you're buying something. So people can, web visitors can type in questions and we provide answers and information. Again, not providing legal advice, of course, but just information and help navigating the website. We've had this for I think since 2013, and so we have a large library of what we call predefined content. People ask the same questions over and over again, so we tend to know what they're going to ask, and then we have a ready-made answer. And so this, I think, will be very helpful in developing our text messaging. We can easily guess what people's problems will be, and we already have these ready-made, short, succinct answers with links to the relevant information on Michigan Legal Help, and so we're going to use this library a lot to build our library of text. So we have 4 objectives. One objective is just further engagement with Michigan Legal Help and triage visitors. We want to deepen our relationship with them, make it more likely that they will come back for future assistance and refer Michigan Legal Help to their friends and neighbors. Second, we really want to collect and analyze the outcomes of triage users. Of course, we're all obsessed with data, so we want more data and information to improve our services and to improve support for our services. We want to, again, provide that additional just-in-time help and information, so it's not just us gathering information and data, but we're also providing an additional service for our end users. And then we want to, of course, improve our services and also add to the national conversation on triage. Everyone who's doing these services is hungry for information about outcomes and results and how to get that information. And so, like Cleveland did, we're going to be adding to the national information bank and conversation. So again, I said I have more questions than answers. So here are some of the questions that I'm wondering about, and as we get to the discussion part of our conversation, I hope you will also think about as well. The first is, how much should we try to learn from our visitors? It's always a question, like how deep do we want to go? How much is, a legitimate amount of information to get? What's useful, what's not useful? We definitely don't want to ask anything beyond what we actually need. And what is most important to learn? Is it more important to learn whether they got help from a lawyer, whether they hired a lawyer, whether legal aid helped them, or whether they went forward on their own, how successful they were? What are the most important things that would improve our services but also add to the national conversation? How far can we go with an automated system? We have plans. I have big plans. I dream big, and we'll see how far we can actually go without overwhelming our staff and building a system that's impossible to maintain. How deep can we go? How detailed can we go? But also, how broad can we go? How many subject areas can we cover? And how far will people tolerate an automated system? At some point, will they just be like, I'm tired of these canned text messages. I want to talk to a person. This is useless. And so, how far can we go, and how far will they stick with us? It's an open question how useful our Live Help library will be. Will it translate from a chat-based function to a text-based conversation? What modifications will we have to make? And my initial answer to some of these questions is that user testing will help with some of these, and others may really be trial and error. That's why it's helpful to learn from folks who have gone before, and our errors will help those of you trying to do something similar in the future. And I just like to remind myself and all of you that every TIG is somewhat experimental. And so, we have no idea how this is going to turn out, but we'll definitely share our results with you, good, bad, or indifferent. So I'm going to turn it over to Rohan.
So now we've heard from a legal aid program that provides advice and assistance. We've heard from Angela, who operates a website that provides legal information and triage. And now we're going to hear from Rohan, who is so PLA gets a TIG grant that supports Rohan's software development at Upsolve, which is an organization that sort of provides high-volume pro se assistance.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rohan Pavluri, the CEO and co-founder of Upsolve. We're a nonprofit that helps low-income families file for bankruptcy for free using our online web app. Last year, we relieved $130 million in debt for over 2,500 low-income families, making Upsolve the largest legal aid nonprofit for bankruptcy in the United States. So I have two goals with my brief talk today. The first is I want to tell you about how we can automate post-filing self-help, and to just show you that there is a way to automate the process after people produce their forms, because we believe at Upsolve that our responsibility does not end when we just help people produce their forms. Our responsibility ends when their lives are transformed because they're able to relieve $50,000 in debt, when their wage garnishment stops, when they're able to really feel like they have a second life. And that doesn't happen when you just produce somebody's forms. So I want to show you one way that you can help people after you help produce their forms, if that's your delivery mechanism. So there's really a few things that we care about when it comes to post-filing. So what happens after somebody produces their forms? Well, after somebody's produced their forms, did they actually file those forms? Second, when is their 341 meeting? And did they have a successful 341 meeting? For people who are unfamiliar in bankruptcy, after you file your bankruptcy forms, there's a 5 to 10 minute meeting with the trustee, who's the court official that oversees your case. That meeting lasts a short amount of time, and it's very straightforward by and large, and we want to make sure that people are prepared, because when you're showing up without a lawyer and you're going into court, that's a scary thing. We want to make sure that people know when their meeting is, where their meeting is, and what happens in that meeting. And then third, did any issues arise? I'm not going to stand up here and tell you that every time somebody fills out their forms with Upsolve and submits those forms to the court, that immediately they're able to get a discharge. In about 5% of cases, there's some issue that arises. Maybe somebody forgot an asset and they need to list that asset because the trustee told them to. Or maybe somebody forgot to file their installment for the court because there's a filing fee. There's a $335 filing fee when you file for bankruptcy. You need to tell the court, you need to pay them to tell them you're broke. That's a big problem in this country, but it exists. We want to make sure that people are able to get through that. So our solution was to scrape PACER. Fortunately, in our niche of the law with bankruptcy, the information is all public. So we know the names of the people and the districts and all the information about them. And we also can then, as a result, scrape PACER to see on a once per week basis, did all of the people who used Upsolve to produce their forms actually file their forms with the court? And for us, this is pretty important because I think the status quo within these self-help tools is that your responsibility, your obligation ends once people produce the forms themselves. And we just stopped there. And we didn't want to do that. We wanted to see whether people actually were filing once we produced their forms. We wanted our impact to be measured by the filings, not just the forms that we produced. So now we know who has filed. And I can tell you that 70% of the people who produce forms with Upsolve actually take those forms to the court and file them. And there's a lot of barriers to actually filing once people create their forms. First and foremost, and this is a huge injustice in America, that if you're filing on your own for bankruptcy, you cannot file electronically. You have to either deliver your forms to the court directly or you have to mail them. And that is discrimination against low-income people who can't afford lawyers, but unfortunately, that is a barrier that we have to deal with. There's other barriers. I mean, there's things that come up in people's lives, and it costs a lot of money to take a day off from work and file, and we're trying to reduce or improve the filing rate once people produce their forms, but at least we know that 70% of people who produce their forms with Upsolve actually take them to the court and file. So we do this once per week. We scrape PACER, we get the information of all the people who have produced forms with Upsolve, see if they filed. But in that week period, if we haven't scraped them yet, they can still continue in what we call the post-filing process of Upsolve. So Upsolve is a lot like TurboTax in the sense that we guide you step by step with the instructions of what you're supposed to do. So when people file their forms, they're able to come back, and they can't move past to the post-filing information until they provided us with their case number. And usually we're also able to pull their case number automatically so that when they log back onto Upsolve after they filed, they already see the post-filing information. Now that post-filing information consists of a video of how to deal with your 341 meeting, instructions about the paperwork that you need to mail your trustee to have a successful 341 meeting, and you have to take this credit counseling, this debtor education course after you file for bankruptcy, and we guide people through how to take that course and get their fee waiver for that course. So when you are scraping PACER, you don't just know who has filed and who hasn't filed. You also know a lot about their case. Essentially, you can see the information that they're receiving from the court. So the most important piece of information is when is their 341 meeting. What we're able to do is actually text people and email them about when their 341 meeting is so that they show up. Because it's a shame if people get to the filing part and they don't actually make their 341 meeting. So we make sure that they do. And the other important thing is that we actually, and this is besides just scraping PACER and scraping these dockets and figuring out when their 341 meeting is, we actually are able to parse the dockets themselves. So for a small percentage of cases, there is some problem that arises. Somebody missed oftentimes somebody either missed their 341 meeting, in which case they need to show up for the rescheduled 341 meeting or talk to their trustee, or they missed their fee waiver installment payment. Those are the two biggest issues that arise. And we know when those arise because our code actually parses the information that people get from the court. And this is really important because when courts are communicating with people, it's not in normal language. They use a lot of Latin, they use a lot of complicated terms, And that in and of itself is a huge injustice as well, that there is not a standardized, simple way that courts communicate. I mean, for me, it's a modern day form of literacy tests, the way that our courts communicate with users and the barriers that they put in their way, because all this language is designed for lawyers, not for low-income families directly. So we take it upon ourselves to translate that non-normal language into plain English that people can understand, and not just translate it, but tell people how to fix these problems that arise. So something that we're currently working on, and we've already started to do, is not just tell people, hey, there's this problem that arose. Not just show them the court notice, but translate it. And then beyond just translating it, give them the tool to fix the problem. Sometimes there's an amendment that needs to be created after a 341 meeting. Now, we have our self-service tool to help people produce their initial forms, but one thing that we're doing now is creating these self-service tools in order to do an amendment to fix a problem that arose in your 341 meeting. And really, from end to end, creating the self-service experience for families so that they're able to get their discharge and to actually get their debt relieved, which is, and always will be, our North Star. So the main takeaway is that you can automate post-filing self-help, and hopefully I've showed you one way to do it. Thank you so much.
All right, so now we have some time for a more roundtable discussion about some of the issues raised in the brief intros. You had mentioned that you decided not to send texts to clients who had DV issues in their cases. So this is a question for any of you to answer. So what are some of the ethical issues involved in sending SMS messages to clients about the legal help that they received? Like it could be like maybe they didn't consent to having text messages sent, like maybe you're worried that somebody else is looking at their phone, stuff like that.
Right, so right from the get-go for us, one of our very initial steps we had to take is incorporating into our intake process that question, can we text you at this number, right? So we had not yet been doing that on a consistent basis with clients, and we're not regularly engaged in text exchanges with clients. So I think that is a really important first step, is just having that be a standard part of the process. And at this point with, in my experience working, not just in our professional world, but just in life, right? Texting seems to be the highly preferred method of communication for many of us. So I think it makes good sense to get that consent for any number of reasons, no matter how your programs might be using it, even in a limited capacity at this point. And then in terms of the DV question, I mean, we really want to make sure that nothing we are doing is creating any greater risk of safety and harm for our clients, right? And so while we ask, is there any DV? Is this a safe number to contact you at? Can we use this number? We just felt that the answer to that question at the point that they applied for our services may have been, yes, it was safe, but we really can't feel totally confident that when the case is closed, that we know confidently that it is still a safe number and that anybody could get their hands on the phone. And so without being able to kind of put the resources into digging further into how to build the appropriate precautions and safeties, we felt it was safer to just not include that group of clients for the time being in this project.
I'll just say quickly that one thing that makes our project different from these two is that we don't have any information about our end users. We don't have any personal information about them. And it's an opt-in only system. So we still have some ethical considerations, but it is much less because our users are anonymous to us, which also means we can't do things like scrape for information because we have nothing to connect it to. So I'm not sure how we'll deal with the domestic violence question. We'll have to think about it some more. I definitely agree with everything that Anne has said. So that's something to be determined.
Nothing to add.
All right, so since this is a tech conference and my favorite topic is the underlying tech, so you were saying you use Frontline SMS. So what other folks use as like the background, the back end to send these text messages?
So we use Twilio, And then the other tool that we use that integrates with Twilio is called Customer.io. And I highly recommend both of those tools. And to scrape Pacer, because Pacer is like not easy to work with, we use a service called Docket Alarm. And we used to use a service called Docket Bird.
We're not doing ours yet, but our website is built on Drupal, and we are looking at Frontline SMS and also Twilio, and then there's a Twilio feature called Twilio Studio that allows you to build automated text. So we will be looking at that, but I'll update you later on what we end up using.
Yeah, I've used Twilio myself, and I just think they're a great company. They produce a wonderful product, but I haven't used Frontline, so I don't really know. Yeah, okay, cool. So I'm wondering, in the context of legal aid, we terminate the attorney-client relationship when we think we're done providing advice, but then there's all this follow-up, and I think that this session was built as cost-effective ways to follow up with clients, but is it opening up a can of worms to keep sending notifications to clients? Is it going to cause them to come back, and is that good or bad? or could you create the impression that the attorney-client relationship still exists because there's been all this back and forth? What do you think about that?
So I think there's two questions in your question, so, or at least. So I think there is a concern, and I think it is incumbent on us to be really clear with our clients about whether or not their case is still open or not. Do we still have an ongoing attorney-client relationship? And that's probably something we should continue to be thoughtful about and continue to improve communication around. Separate from that, the question about, when should you re-engage with your client? Should you, reopen that attorney-client relationship even if you closed it? Is something that we tested in our pilot. So some of the surveys that we used in that first TIG included messages that would give recipients an option to text back a keyword if they had run into a problem. So for example, one of the surveys was sent to clients who had received pro se divorce filing assistance. They had an opportunity to meet one-on-one with an attorney. We helped prepare their documents, and then we sent them off to continue the process on their own, including having given them instructions about service. But we knew from experience that that was one of the hurdles that a lot of folks faced, was not being able to perfect service on the opposing party. So we built into that survey an option: if you have not been able to complete service, reply service help, and someone will follow up with you. And so those replies could be automatically filtered into a particular attorney's inbox, and so they would get an alert via email. Someone had responded needing additional help with service, and could, using the mobile phone number, look at the case and then follow up as necessary to help with that problem. And I do think it is, to remember our big picture here, right? We want to find ways of making limited scope services effective for clients. And so having sort of touch points where we do identify common hurdles or common problems, and being willing to re-engage around those issues in order to make the limited scope services as effective as possible, I think is helpful. There was absolutely a concern of opening the floodgates and, this creating the option of everybody coming back for more help, and it did not turn out to be true. About 13% of users took advantage of those extra help text messages. So it was a manageable number.
Yeah, I mean, for us, our follow-up is really just around the bankruptcy case, and we, in our experience, have not had this problem of people following up after bankruptcy about other issues. The one instance where there's some other legal issue, it's because people are being sued for their debt, and they always ask us, do I need to show up in court during my bankruptcy case? How do I deal with this lawsuit? Because usually these lawsuits drive people to recognize that bankruptcy is the right option. So, we send people help articles around that and tell them about how bankruptcy affects these lawsuits. But we actually have not experienced this problem of people thinking that this is a sustained relationship.
So one of the things that we often ask clients after the case is over is, how did we do? And we want to get some feedback about whether they had a good experience receiving the service. Is that something that you folks do, or you plan to do, or are you just interested in the outcomes?
Yeah, absolutely. We're relentless in asking for feedback from our users. So every single person who uses Upsolve is sent an email with a service called Delighted that captures what's called NPS, Net Promoter Score, which is a standard industry metric, which is basically on a scale from 1 to 10, how likely are you to recommend Upsolve? And then we ask them a series of questions about why. And then something that I think has really helped our team is we have 2 channels in Slack. One is called testimonials, one is called anti-testimonials. And in real time, throughout every single day, these testimonials come in, and from time to time, these anti-testimonials come in. And in real time, we know what our users are thinking about us.
We are hoping to gather that information, but one of the interesting aspects of our tool is that we make so many referrals to other agencies, and so we can get feedback about their experience in court, and we can get their feedback about their experience on our statewide hotline, or with the legal aid program, or with the state bar. So we'll be able to get their feelings about many different services as well. You know, whether mediation was useful to them in this case context. So I'm looking forward to hopefully getting a lot of information about a variety of service providers, as well as, you know, looking in our own house.
I can definitely see us using it for that application as well, although I do think it's tricky sometimes to be clear that we separate what a client's experience of their services from the outcome of their legal case. So there are certainly lots of examples of instances where we know that the law does not give an option for the client to achieve what it is they're looking to achieve, right? It's not going to be available to give them exactly what they would like to have happen in the problem that they're facing. So they may not be happy even if we know that the outcome achieved was in some ways the best possible outcome that they could get. So I not to take away from using SMS for both of those, but I do think it's important to think through how you would, again, make clear to the recipient of the messages what it is you're asking for, and not sort of conflate those two experiences of outcomes versus of their experience of your service.
One of the issues that I've had with collecting data is that first I have no data and I have no information about what happened, and then I do have the data, but then the point is, well, what do you do with it once you have it? Like, you want to know these things and then you know them, but is it really going to change the behavior of the organization? And I was wondering if you have any advice or things that you've done to lay the groundwork for being data-driven and maybe get people to act differently depending on the information collected? This is a hard question.
So we collect a lot of data in Cleveland, and we look at it a lot. And I hope and I believe we are diligent in trying to make data-driven program decisions. So I feel like in our situation and for our organization, the culture of relying on data to inform resource allocation and program development decisions is there. So so once we build up a more robust set of data around our limited scope services, I'm hopeful that it will be a relatively seamless process to sort of add that into the layers of data that we already look at as we develop services. I mean, just not so specifically in the context of this work, but we've used data to determine sort of the distribution of our work across our multi-county service area, and do we need to put more or less resources into different types of access points or service delivery models in different communities based on barriers and needs that different geographic regions face. So we've done it in a lot of different ways to inform our decision making.
Just two process ways that we operationalize our data is once a week with my entire team. We have an all hands and we do a data review. How many cases were filed, how many people create accounts, and then we talk about NPS. So once a week we do that. And then every 4 weeks we have a product meeting where every single person in the company is invited to join. A small company, so it's not so hard, but everybody in our nonprofit joins, and the people and everybody advocates for the features that they think should be built. And the only way that you're going to get everybody to buy in is if you really use data to show. I also do believe in individual experiences and customer experiences, but combined with data. So those are two ways where we operationalize our data.
Within Michigan Legal Help, we are small, so we're very agile. We are data-driven. I also share the good and the bad feedback with my staff, but we do regular user testing and we change our systems regularly. So I feel confident that we'll be able to use the data from this project to make changes within Michigan Legal Help and the Guide to Legal Help pretty well. I don't know about changes in the bigger picture. We're hoping to get information about, the ways that Michigan Legal Help interacts with legal aid and with the private bar and with the courts. And I don't know how much success we'll have with using data to promote change, but it is better than anything we have right now. So I'm optimistic.
So you had mentioned that you had a 60% response rate when you tried the pilot, and you said 70% of people actually filed. Those numbers are actually pretty good, especially the response rate to SMS, because often I think we think, oh, we're going to send out a survey and we might be happy if we get 5% of people responding. I was wondering if you had any strategies for nudging people to actually respond or like follow up more than once. If you need the user to do something, do you have strategies for nudging them to get them to do that thing?
Several. Definitely, you can imagine with this web app, we even collect hundreds of pieces of information from people. How do you get them through the entire process? So I'll just talk about a couple. One is plan making. So when people print out their forms, or when they actually get to the end of the survey, we ask people to actually write out, how are you going to get to the courthouse? Who's going to drive you? What day are you going to go? And one thing that I like that we've done, which has been very useful and pretty transformative in terms of improving our filing rate, is we make people choose a filing date. So you can file your bankruptcy forms whenever you want after you've filled them out. But how do you actually get people, once they've printed out or gotten to the end of the process and created their forms, to actually go and file their forms and really come up with a plan around how they're going to file their forms? So we created this concept of a filing date. We tell people you can file whenever you want. We're very transparent about that, but we make them actually choose a date that they're going to go to the courthouse and file their forms. And that has been so helpful for us because users actually do follow through on these plans, and when we make them choose a date. And using Google Maps, we should display in our app itself what courthouse, based on their zip code that we've pulled, which courthouse they should go to. So that has been extremely helpful in terms of clarity. And then the other thing is once people actually have to go to the courthouse, it can get kind of scary, and it can be intimidating to walk into the courthouse. Extremely intimidating. I'm intimidated. So what we've done is, at that moment where we recognize that there's this fear, we've shown testimonials. We have in our product testimonials and user stories about people who've used Upsolve, and we know that that moment in time is an important one to get people to understand sort of the benefits of filing, and really don't be scared if that's the thing that's holding you back.
Anything?
No, we did not do any specific nudging of any kind. My hunch is that the of the surveys, as in that they related very directly to the problem and the service that the client received, was particularly helpful, as opposed to sort of a generic, you called legal aid for help and how did it go type question. But I think we will learn a lot more about that in our piloting of this new round of messages, that in scaling up, they are necessarily less specific. We've tried to still build on some specificity, but they are not nearly as specific as the pilot question. So that might inform that question a little bit.
Yeah, and I think letting them know that something is coming might help them be more likely to respond. Another thing that I've done is on our online intake site, the last screen says, you may receive a text from this number. And I've gotten some feedback on that online intake site that people appreciate knowing what number a text is going to come from, because then when they can put that into their phone and they know who it is. So that might help as well. But I've been monopolizing the questions, but I'm sure there are audience members who have questions for the panel. Yes?
You had mentioned like a national information bank that you're sharing information with.
Let me repeat that.
Could you describe like what that bank effort is and how others can join or get information?
The question was that you had mentioned the National Information Bank, and he wanted more information about how to access that.
Sure. So one of the objectives we plan to tackle as part of our current TIG is to build it, so it doesn't exist yet, but we are working on it. A group met yesterday over lunch to talk about how to keep moving forward with this. There seems to be lots of interest, so we hope to get that accomplished for sure. I'm happy to take information from folks who would like to be part of the development process. If there's anybody in the room that really is looking to help inform, what kind of information should be there, how does this framework get structured, and how we set it up. That's what we're in the process of planning for. So happy to chat about that if you're interested in joining those conversations. But I would say if you're more looking to just benefit from it, then hang tight. It should hopefully be more, by the end of this TIG round. So we have to have it at least framed out, and then, I think the implementation will likely come over time.
So it's a TIG project?
Right, so it's part of our current TIG. So it's one of the components of the TIG that we're working on currently, is to develop the framework for that national set of information.
Question there? So the question, I have to repeat the question for the live stream, but and which you made it difficult by asking too. So the first question was around the iteration of the flow of the questions, like to try to get people to actually act upon the outcomes, and I've already forgotten what the second question was. Do you remember what the second question?
About combining automated with...
Oh yeah, the second question was whether it could be possible to combine a sort of automated response with a more bespoke response that actually written by a human. Thanks.
So with respect to the sequencing of the text messages, we have not done a lot of analysis into that. I think, again, that might be something that our current TIG offers more opportunity for than we were able to do out of the first pilot. We sequence those messages based on our experience in different problem areas, right? So we know an eviction case moves a lot more quickly than a divorce case. And so the timing of the messages is based on our experience handling different types of issues. So clients are getting, and I didn't go into this in my earlier presentation, but the way it works is depending on the nature of the issue the client had, they're getting a unique set of questions, the sequence of which is determined by the nature of the problem and what we think we've told them likely to do. So if we are, for example, preparing papers for somebody to file to get their criminal record sealed, they are going to get a message asking, were you able to file your papers? At some point down, several weeks later, did your record get sealed? And then many more weeks after that, did sealing your record help you get a job? And so there's a lot of time in between those messages, which was a concern for us too about, are they going to think like, who the heck is this? Just texting me again 8 weeks later, I have no idea. So we in some instances did add a message that was just informational, this is legal aid, you had reached out to us for this help, and here's a link to some information on our website about the record sealing process or something like that. But mostly we've just kind of let them run according to the sequence of the questions. And again, there may be a lot more to learn about how to maximize the benefits of how to do that, but we haven't done detailed analysis. I may be misunderstanding your second question, but in terms of sort of individualized texting with clients versus this automated system for collecting outcome data, we have kept those totally separate. So we use texting in LegalServer to communicate with clients about appointment reminders or bring your documents in or any follow-up that our advocates need to do on a one-on-one case type basis. That's actually on a separate SMS number, and we do that outside of the automatic system. Did that answer what you were? Okay.
So Rohan, on the question of canned responses that are automatic versus bespoke, written by a human, how does Upsolve balance that?
Yeah. So we actually do both. When we do texting, there's this one part of our process where we actually have an attorney review the forms that the user has filled out to make sure that they're accurate and that they will get a discharge and there's no missing information. And from time to time, there's problems in the forms where there's missing information or tax returns, the income from there is not reflected properly in the income section of the bankruptcy form Schedule I, or Statement of Financial Affairs, and our attorney will text users to verify the information. So there's that one discrete part of the process where at this point can't be automated or hasn't been automated, and it's not serious enough for the engineering resources to be dedicated towards it that we've figured out it's just best to have our attorney reviewer text the user to verify this information. And then as I mentioned, when issues arise, we are now working on these self-help tools to get people through the process of making an amendment, for example, because they lost their job in between when they filed their forms and when they actually had their 341 meeting. We just tell people, email help@upsolve.org, we'll help you out. So that's one way we've balanced.
And I'll just add that when we are developing our sequencing and language of our text, we'll be able to mine the data from our live help conversations, which are more bespoke conversations with people, and we get about 600 of those a month. So we have a pretty large library to look at to try to help guide our development of that.
There was a question from over here. Let me bring the mic over. These two-part questions.
First question is, for Ann, how many times do you send a text message before you give up on a response?
Just once.
Just once, okay. Are you sending satisfaction surveys as well, and do you feel like that's dragging down the responses for either question?
We are not currently sending our client satisfaction surveys by text. So it's...
or at all? Are you sending...
Oh, we send paper surveys still for those, and my sense is not at all. I'm looking at my colleague who's shaking his head. No interference. Yeah, okay.
Okay. And lastly, who is analyzing the responses in your office?
So at this point from our first TIG, that was really just our internal team. So we have a data grants expert who's here, my colleague in the front row. So he has really been super beneficial. We have built into this current TIG a contract with social scientists. We've contracted with Case Western Reserve University Center on Urban Studies and Poverty to help us develop the analytical framework for maximizing the learning we can get out of the data, but we haven't started collecting data because we're not yet sending the new messages, so that's not happening quite yet.
Other question? Let me come back.
I too have two questions, but one is a follow-up. Was it a strategic decision to not, I guess, why have you chosen not to get feedback, customer service feedback, or just satisfaction feedback at the same time? Why was that decision made, I guess, is my first question.
I don't have a great answer to that, other than the focus of this all along has been outcome data. And very specifically wanting to figure out if we could learn about the effectiveness of limited services, which again, as I was saying earlier, I think is really importantly distinct from the client's experience. But I could absolutely see us building out as another step in this whole project and expanding our use of SMS to do the client experience surveys via text. I don't see why we wouldn't ultimately get that done too. It just hasn't been a focus of the TIG.
And do you consider outcomes, so for instance, the client's ability to have resolved the issue to their satisfaction, do you see that more as a satisfaction question or an outcomes question?
That's an interesting data point. I would probably put that more on the client's experience. I think we try to be pretty careful in defining outcomes in, I guess what I would say is a relatively objective way, right? I mean, was the eviction granted or not? Was the debt reduced or not? Did you stop getting harassed by creditors? Was your record sealed, right? So a very sort of clear answer to that. And I think sometimes the client's goal aligns with that, so it could be the same thing, but sometimes it doesn't.
I think you have to answer that question as part of planning your project and make it specific to what you're doing with that data and information. A few years ago, we did a TIG that was looking at outcomes of people who use Michigan Legal Help to get divorced, and we very specifically decided that getting a divorce was the outcome that we were looking at. And, people said, well, you don't know, what if they got a crappy divorce? I'm like, I don't, I can't possibly judge that from looking at a paper file. And you know what, neither can you. People get divorced with whatever terms they end up with for their own particular reasons. But for the purposes of our study, we wanted to know, did they get through the process, and success was defined as getting divorced. But that was what we were doing with that particular project. So I think it's really part of the design of your stuff, what you're hoping to get out of it, and what you're hoping to do with that information.
Got a question in the front?
It's more a comment, as I'm Anne's colleague who she had referred to. So in designing the flows of the survey questions, certain questions had a response. Most of them are yes, no's, like has this happened or not. Some of them do incorporate a response of not yet, which was primarily included so that we would not then present follow-up questions for things that had not yet occurred, but in a way that does have the side effect of working as a nudge or a reminder of, have you filed this yet? Yes, no, or not yet sort of can serve as a reminder, oh, I need to go and file this document for the process to proceed. So nudges weren't really consciously designed except as a way to be sure that our questions were not going out before certain things had happened.
Thank you. This is so interesting. To get at one of, I think, your earlier questions, I'd just like to learn more about what you're doing with this data. Are you using it for grant applications? How are you changing your programs to try to get at more of those positive outcomes?
Right, so we haven't used, the data that we collected in our pilot was very limited. It was really small numbers. Our expectation is that once we are sending these to everybody who has a case closed as having received advice or brief service, that we will develop enough data to make informed choices about which types of services lend themselves to brief service. So where are clients generally able to achieve outcomes and accomplish what they're trying to do with some form of limited scope service? And where is limited assistance so ineffective that we should stop pretending we're helping people with these advice letters and just move on and either come up with a different service delivery or just give them information on their rights and legal rights and remedies. So I think that's one of the applications we will look towards. I also think it could help us understand subgroups of clients and barriers that different groups face, and maybe where we need to address more access issues for clients. So we know that some group is able to navigate the eviction process on their own, but perhaps we identify that in one of our communities, our Spanish-speaking clients are really running into problems left and right and can never get their never get through the court process. Well, maybe we really need to do some advocacy around language access and Title VI in that community and make sure those courts are really following through on their obligations to provide interpreters and translate documents, et cetera. So I think that could be another potential application where we identify some systemic issues. And I think just in terms of the resource allocation question always, right? So where do we get, even if it's not a huge payoff, right? So maybe we don't have, 70% of people saying they've achieved positive outcomes. Maybe we learn, and this came out of our pilot, that if we give people a very clear step-by-step process for using a rent deposit procedure to address conditions issues in their housing, it's super low cost on our part. We just need to send them a link or send them a letter if they really want it in paper, but usually just electronically give them this process. So even if it's not a huge number that solve the conditions issue with that, it's such a low investment on our part that maybe we need to be doing that more broadly because it is helpful to some percent of people. So we need to understand, and that's one of the things we hope working with the social science folks will help us is, what are even the benchmarks? How do we even determine what's good enough in the realm of limited scope services? I don't know if anybody has examples or research that informs that question. I'd love to hear about it because I haven't seen a lot written or have seen a lot on that question of how do you make that call, right? That's part of what we're trying to figure out.
We're doing a lot of the same things. In terms of we hope to improve the delivery of information through Michigan Legal Help. If we find out that everyone who files for divorce gets stuck on the default step, then we need to either add more information or better information or maybe a video, to hit those hot spots with more information. Maybe we need to change the organization of material on the website. Similarly, to improve systemic issues, if we find that everyone who tries to use the modest means panel never gets any help, then we can go talk to the bar about that problem, or maybe take it off of, not refer to it anymore. And then also identify, for example, is there a better way to address a problem like expungement? If people are, we have clinics for expungement, legal aid organizations take them on, and then people do them a lot on their own. And so if we find out that everyone who does them on their own, or a large percentage are successful doing it on their own, then maybe that shouldn't really be a priority for legal aid to do full representation on expungement cases. Or maybe we don't even need clinics. Inversely, if we find out that people are really struggling to get through that process, then maybe we need to drive more people to clinics to get more support. So we're hoping to find what is the value of self-help? What are the limits of self-help, and where are the hot spots where we can provide more assistance?
Yeah, I think resource allocation, where to invest engineering resources, where to invest customer service resources, and where to invest content resources.
Oh, on the topic of systemic issues uncovered through outcome tracking, what did you discover in this district in Florida from users who are actually going to file their petitions?
So in the Middle District of Florida, you need to submit your creditor matrix after you file either by USB or CD-ROM. There's literally no other way. You can't mail it, you can't email it, you would literally have to do it by USB or CD-ROM. So what I did is I wrote the clerk a letter and waiting to hear back, but it's just a terrible thing, barrier for low-income people in this country. But I mean, it's just interesting because I called the clerk. Her name was Kate, and I said, "Hey, did you look at Colorado? You can at least email there. These are the instructions." And she's like, "Oh, we didn't consider it." So it wasn't like sort of people were trying to put these barriers. They just didn't even think that email was a possibility. So I mean, this is sort of humbling in the sense it's not time to get angry. It's time to educate.
Last quick question for Rohan. Since there are other cases that where the results are public information, have you considered expanding your business into other areas of law?
Yeah, I mean, as you can imagine, someone asks me that like about once a week, and for us, there's definitely have considered it, but there's a lot more people who are in debt who need to know about us, so we're doubling down there.
All right, quick question from Quentin.
What's next after SMS? Is SMS going to be the gold standard forever? And how do you figure out what that is? WhatsApp, Facebook chat?
The question is, what's next after SMS? Are we going to be going to WhatsApp or other technologies?
Well, I know what J-Powell's answer is, which is he wants it to be Alexa.
Not really.
He's like, he tells me, why can't you talk into Google Home or Alexa and figure out your petition that way? So, but I mean, for us, I guess we do have Facebook, Messenger, but SMS and email keep us occupied right now.